Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, I usually give very short titles to my videos when I store them on my computer, and this one I called Confirmation. Why? Well, because it confirms a lot of what I've been saying over the last 5 to 6 years. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it's nice to have an outside confirmation for all of these things I've been saying. And the reason why I want to cover what is essentially two articles, which I'll put the links for those in the description, is for the following purpose. I'll give you that right up front. Here is confirmation that, number one, these entertainment industries are actively seeking to purge older fans from their audience of what they're making currently. Secondly, they do not care about storytelling. It is politically motivated, what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they certainly don't care about heroes or the hero's journey. And thirdly, which is most importantly, they have absolutely no intent to change what they are doing right now. Doesn't matter how much money they lose. Doesn't matter how much they destroy. They have no intention of changing. And I want to drive that point home. Why? Because here's the thing. Most people, certainly for my channel, I would say, have already accepted a point or mentally accepted an idea that the older properties that they love are in the hands of people that will destroy them. You're going to have to abandon them. But quite honestly, I think, first of all, a mental decision that that's the case would very easily be dismissed if they started writing good stories. So there's always a tiny little bit of hope in the back of your mind. And of course, the rest of the people who don't subscribe to this, and by the way, no, it's not black-pilled, it's simply looking at reality and understanding that this is the way it is. But the other people are saying, yes, I have a hope that it can turn around. Yes, I have a hope that whatever it is I like from the past, whether it be original Star Wars or just Luke Skywalker, whether it be the way you play Dungeons and Dragons from 2nd edition, 3rd edition, the way good comic stories were told, the way gameplay for video games was centered around action and excitement, all of that is gone for your mainstream entertainment. I have someone who regularly interacts with me on Twitter. His name is Joe, and I'll just leave it at that. But Joe, if you're listening, he calls this, and I think this is what we should call it from now on, the dark times, which is just referencing that old Obi-Wan Kenobi line from, I think, the first Star Wars movie, before the Empire, before the dark times. And to use another very old quote, if you're going towards any kind of mainstream entertainment right now, there should be a large sign popping up in your vision whenever you go to mainstream entertainment, which says to you, abandon hope, all ye who enter here. And so I'm doing this video, again, to repeat a whole lot of things I've gone over, to give confirmation of what I've gone over. And many people say to me, it's so hard to listen to your videos, RJ, because it's so sad. So you can click off this video anytime you want. Just make sure that you have that realization in your mind. That realization which is going to be driven home by these two articles that, yeah, you need to abandon any kind of mainstream entertainment, even if it is something you dearly loved as a child, a teenager, whatever, doesn't matter. It's gone. But on the other hand, to realize there is a very bright spot in this entire thing. There is a rebellion to the empire. There is subculture being built up in little corners here and there. There is good entertainment out there if you just get off your butt and look for it. And that's the problem with so many of us today. And I would include myself in that statement, just by the way, because that's what the mainstream entertainment is counting on, that you are too lazy to go and look for something better. And of course, very briefly, before I get into these two articles, I just want to mention that part of that alternative storytelling, part of that indie scene that concentrates on good storytelling, good characters, good heroes, are my 3 graphic novels. There are 2 links in the description and on the pinned comment where you can go and order one of my graphic novels. There are 2 superhero graphic novels and 1 low fantasy graphic novel, Sword and Sorcery. I concentrate on giving my audience action, excitement, and fun. Exactly what they're asking for. And I concentrate my stories not only around good storytelling, but around the idea, the traditional idea of a hero. And you're looking at some of the spectacular art from those in the background. So if that sounds or looks appealing to you in any way, click on one of those links and go on over and see if my graphic novels are for you. All right, so I'm going to do a lot of reading from these articles because they just get straight to the point. As I said, the links for these are in the description if you want to go read the full articles. They're from a website called Film Threat. The first is an open letter from a white writer to the film and TV business. That's the name of the article. It was published on the 15th of January, 2024. The other is titled Male, Pale, and Stale, Responses to an Open Letter to the WGA, published on the 1st of February, 2024. So just both of them over the last few weeks. Now, you might have heard other people already cover some of what is being discussed here in these articles, but hopefully I'm going to give you a little bit of a fresh perspective on this entire thing. Why? Because I'm going to, as much as possible, reference, when I hit a point that is confirmation, one of my older videos. Now, why is that helpful? Well, that's helpful because both of these articles are written according to anonymous letters sent to this publication. So again, you're going to have to trust the publication that they did their due diligence to actually make sure that these are real people. Because it's anonymous, we don't really know. But the fact is that I've covered these things, a lot of these things, over the last 6 years on my channel. And I don't go back to anonymous sources. I go back to statements being made from people on podcasts and articles, words out of their own mouths to confirm all of this. But I usually get people saying, oh, you were just exaggerating this or that, or, oh, it's just the comic industry that you're focusing on. That's not entertainment as a whole. But yeah, it's entertainment as a whole because number one, comics is a good microcosm, as I'm always saying. Why? Because they just like to talk and they show themselves, they out themselves on what they're doing. And you can very easily make the logical step of if these people following a certain ideological bent are going to act in this way in a small industry as part of entertainment, when they get into the larger parts of entertainment, they're going to act the exact same way. That plus the fact that if you have the people at the bottom doing this exact thing, and over the last couple of weeks, really month and a half, 2 months, I've been talking about how the people at the top, which are Bob Iger and the people who run Disney or various directors, also think in this exact same way, not just randomly, but using almost the exact same quotes over and over again with different projects, with different characters, with different mediums. This is indeed a top-down thing. This is something that is pervasive. It's not something that's grassroots. It is an imposition upon the entire entertainment industry. So let's get into this and move with speed. The first article, as I said, is an open letter from a white writer to the film and TV business. It is from Anonymous, and they say the following. For the last 20 years, I've been working as a professional screenwriter. And by the way, I'm going to skip around in this article, just going over the very main points. They continue, in 2019, things started to change, and quickly. Suddenly, subtext and themes became the main point of discussing a project or IP. The first question in every meeting became, what can we say with this project? Or, what can we teach people with this story? Plot, character, and audience were now secondary, and something not even discussed. And here I'll point you back to my very old video, the very first one I did about Sana Amanat, where she did an interview with Fast Company, where she said that comic books and comic book characters were for pushing positive ideas. And oh, by the way, positive in her mind means quote-unquote progressive. And then he goes on to discuss where this came from. He says from these new execs that were being hired, and says the following. These new execs weren't savvy and business-minded execs. They were young, with no track record or comprehension of the bottom line. When the streaming wars started and the money hose was turned on, those experienced executives started relying on these young guns to pick up the slack. But the kids were less focused on the hero's journey and more concerned with taking down the patriarchy. Let me reference right here my video where I talk about, well, several of them, the fact that the bottom line for entertainment industry is no longer money, it is awards, so that they can sell their message. Main video for that I did was about an award being presented, or several awards being presented to Sana Amanat from feminist associations that she was using to push the agenda that she was currently working on at that time. Oh, by the way, for people who are just running across my channel for the first time, Sana Amanat was the person in operational control of Marvel Comics for about 10 years before she moved on to Hollywood, becoming a producer on superhero television shows. Anyway, the article goes on. White, straight, male writers and directors with experience and successful track records have been sidelined. We've essentially been told that because of our race and gender, we need not apply. At one point, my agent told me that they couldn't put me up for any OWA, open writer assignments, or TV staffing jobs because the execs only wanted to hear takes on the material from BIPOC, that is to say, Black, Indigenous, people of color, or female or LGBTQ writers. Some shows even started instituting staffing quotas that 40 to 50% of the writing staff had to be people of color. And here I'll reference my, at the very least, 2 videos, one on Kelly Sue DeConnick, one on the writer of Silver Surfer Gaslight, backed up by the research I did into Marvel hiring practices, which says that there are white lists in order to create a quote-unquote diverse working system within whatever entertainment that you're working on, and they use these white lists in order to get around what is essentially the law, where you can't discriminate on how you hire, because of course they're discriminating about who they hire, only going for the groups that I just mentioned in that quote from this article. It continues, half their staff coming from a pool of young, inexperienced writers who knew nothing about working in a writer's room, production, post, or deadlines. I'll get back to that point in just a second, but they continue. No institution reinforces this more than the Writers Guild of America. And here I pause and go back to that video I did about 6 months ago about the Writers Guild of America and their Zoom meeting of, and it's literally titled, How to Queer Legacy Characters. Also, you're looking at in the background some questionnaires that were put out by the Writers Guild of America to their members, as well as other Writer Guild survey questionnaires for their members. And it says within these articles that for newer members, you have to fill these out. For older members, it's only suggested that you fill these out. However, if you don't, they will hound you incessantly until you do. And if you're just listening to me, these questionnaires are about how you are not white and male. The article continues on and says, if you so much as raise an eyebrow at any of this, there's a risk that you'll never work again. So again, confirmation of the multitude of videos that I've done about blacklisting people from the entertainment industry. It goes on to say that they can't complain about an episode that these young writers have turned in late or didn't turn in at all, or they'll be called racist or bigoted or something else, and they'll get a call from the HR department. And so, as he says, and again, I quote, it's just easier to shut up and run cover for these kids who aren't ready for the big time. And I reference my older videos about editing and how within, at the very least, the comic book industry, you're not allowed to edit any of the creators anymore. And if they turn something in, as it says here, late, or they don't turn it in at all, or it's subpar, you just gotta take it and do what you can to shove it out there into the world. And then it sums up the whole thing by saying, the blame for this mess is threefold. Young creative execs with no understanding of the business or what audiences want gained too much influence during the streaming wars. They also took it upon themselves to lead the charge to reinterpret intellectual property, changing successful comic books, novels, and remakes into projects that had something to say, not to entertain. And then it asks the questions, why even bother with intellectual property if you don't respect the source material? And continuing on, the WGA followed their lead and threw a huge part of their own membership under the bus in a race to bring in new audiences. And lastly, this new class of writers who weren't ready yet to step up to the plate worked on a lot of product that the general public didn't want to see and don't relate to. And again, this is just a broad topic that I talk about all the time. But let's move on now to the second article, because the first article was from an anonymous member of the Writers Guild of America, giving you the lowdown on what was going on within Hollywood. And the second article is about responses from various people in various writers' guilds in television, movies, music, comic books, talking about how this anonymous article is exactly right. And then after saying, yes, you're exactly right, sometimes they give very direct examples of this exact thing happening. The article again is titled Male, Pale, and Stale, Responses to an Open Letter to the WGA, and they use that tagline, Male, Pale, and Stale, because it's something that these people in these response letters say over and over again. Quite honestly, the first response is the best and gives you the most detail, so I'll go over that one more than any other. And it says, giving a list. Number 1, writers hired on comic book shows are told it's a positive that they are unfamiliar with the original comic book and not a fan of the existing intellectual property because they want to do a, quote, modern new take on the material relevant to today. Now, I can go as far back as my videos on Cena Grace being granted miniseries after miniseries in the Marvel Universe with the character Iceman, and how after, I think it was 4 miniseries that he did for this character, he revealed that he still didn't know how the character's powers worked. Why? Because, as it says here, it's a positive that you go in not knowing anything about the character, anything about the intellectual property. He continues on. Number 2, writers are asked A, why this story today? How is it relevant politically today to the existing narrative they're pushing on our culture? And B, why are you the person to tell it? And because I have talent and wrote it is not, and that's in capital letters, not a valid answer. What is a valid answer is because I'm a member of this aggrieved group or class, and only we can tell our own story. And if I want to sum all of that up, I can look back to the video I did on a Marvel podcast where Sana Amanat, again, the then second in command at Marvel Comics, who dealt with hiring and firing, offered a job to a, I think it was 16-year-old girl they were interviewing because she was a native environmentalist activist. Because, of course, Marvel didn't have one of those, and she would bring a unique perspective to writing a comic book, even though she had zero experience in any kind of writing. It goes on to number 3 to say, this means that unless you are, for example, African American, you are not allowed to tell a story about an African American character, or disabled, or LGBTQI2+. Unless you are that specific subgroup, you can't write it. I've done multiple videos on this, by the way, talking to comic book pros saying, I don't want to work for the big 2 anymore. Why? Because I'm, let's say, Black, and they'll only give me specific Black characters to write. They won't let me write anything else. I had a conversation with the author of the indie comic Fiendish, who used to work for Marvel, and she said part of the reason she got out of there was because they pigeonholed her and she could only draw very specific things. I had a conversation with Clifton Duncan, who used to act in Hollywood, saying, I wanted to play various kinds of characters, but they pigeonholed me and would only allow me to play what was basically an oppressed Black man. Both of those conversations, by the way, are on my YouTube channel. And I've also done videos about not just the writing of these things, but when Marvel was making its push for animated shorts for, I think it was Marvel Rising and the other animated shows, they had characters which had very diverse backgrounds and diverse skin colors, and they had to find an exact match of a voice actor for the voice actor to play that character. Or the video I did about how there were sometimes 3, 4, 6 writers on a comic book because they had different characters in this so-called superhero group, which were of diverse backgrounds, and they had to get various diverse people to write all the dialogue for these various diverse characters because one writer couldn't do it because he wasn't the same ethnicity as them. It goes on. Number 4, there's a bias towards 2fers and 3fer hire. Being gay, for example, isn't enough now. You have to be gay / African American / Latinx / undocumented / unhoused / differently abled. Then on the DEI scorecard, you have a 2 times or 3 times positive score for the hire. Again, see my multiple videos about intersectionality, especially the ones that are centered around the Women of Marvel podcast, or Kelly Sue DeConnick, who is a avowed intersectional feminist, who, by the way, is the writer of the awful Captain Marvel character we have today. Now I'm going to skip over number 5, but number 6 is many of these writers hired only for diversity purposes feel obligated to push stories that reflect the specific box they've checked. So a writer will be pitching stories exclusively about that experience. And of course, that just circles right back to the other thing which I said above, which is the fact that only people of specific races can write that race. Only people of specific religions can write that religion. Only people of specific orientations can write that orientation. And it is strictly adhered to. The article goes on to say, the mantra is, Male and pale is stale. Out with the old order and in with the new. This system encourages cry bullies, those who complain of oppression as a means of moving up the ladder. Push out someone higher up the chain and move up. Again, I covered this in a podcast from the Women of Marvel, where they were talking about the fact that men have to hold the doors open for women to get into these specific jobs, that is to say, the higher up jobs, so that they can then supplant them. It continues and says, writers' rooms have historically been a freewheeling place for spitballing ideas and jokes. Now folks are on eggshells for fear of offending DEI standards, which are forever shifting. And again, see my multiple videos about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is the DEI standards they're talking about here. Another letter says, Norman Lear used to have Republican conservatives writing in his rooms. Nowadays, that would be impossible. And again, I referenced that video I just talked about a few minutes ago with the hiring practices of Marvel and the white lists and the black lists of who you could bring in and how you could bring them in. If you were on this white list, you are already vetted as not being someone who was a Republican conservative. Or that other video I did about Bobby Chase, who used to be one of the editors-in-chief at Marvel back in the 90s, saying that when she was hired, she had to check her politics at the door, but she worked to subvert that system so that it is now the opposite case. Another quote from this article is talking about the streaming services, and it says, streamers don't care if they have to hire a new young staff every season. It's cheaper that way. No series gets to build continuity in its staff from season to season. And that's a huge part of why you see so much crappy writing on TV today. The first part of that is something I've talked about on my live streams, about how if you examine the structure of, let's say, Marvel Comics, you can see that they pick artists specifically, not so much writers, but artists from various areas of the world, so they don't have to pay them very much. And secondly, of course, the multiple videos I've done since the entire span of my YouTube channel about how these writers don't care about continuity. For the most recent example, I guess, go back to that, again, Writers Guild of America Association Zoom call that I covered about 6 months ago, where they talked about continuity as a flowing river of emotions. Of course, that's what they think continuity is, because they don't have any connection to these characters, to this world, to this intellectual property, because they're hired specifically because they don't. And oh, by the way, that's the exact same thing that Sana Amanat, that second in command at Marvel Comics, was hired for. The words out of her own mouth was, they came to her out of the blue and said, do you want this job? And she said to them, I don't have the experience to do what you're asking of me. And they replied, that's exactly what we want. If you want my video where I covered that, I think it was Patient Zero. And the other video right after that, who is Sana Amanat? And to give you just one final quote from this article, is just a lone sentence in one of these letters that they received. It says, this corporate and political approach isn't art. Stating also that this approach is not only industry-wide, but culturally wide, and it affects film, comic books, and other mediums, as it states. And once again, I'll refer back to my multiple videos about how what entertainment is right now is propaganda. It's not art. It's meant to teach you something, and not only teach you something, but teach it to you in an underhanded way. So, if you've gotten this far into the video, if you haven't given up about the dismal state of everything I just went over, remember, the silver lining to this entire thing is the fact that, number one, you need to realize all hope is lost for mainstream entertainment systems. Don't carry a torch for any of it, because that realization is a powerful thing. Although younger generations might not get this, since they lived in a world where so much of the culture has revolved around them. But if you were Gen X, this is how we grew up. There was very little entertainment we could get our hands on at the time, and the mainstream stuff, none of it was for us. None of it. We had to scour everything we could find in order to find something that was even remotely directed towards us and had quality. And by the way, this is where all of the intellectual properties that they're now subverting came from. We created our own heroes, we wrote our own stories, and we put it out into the world, even though it was rough around the edges and was swished away with the back of someone's hand, if you even dared mention it in normal society. So this is nothing new. This is reverting to the way it used to be. And as a part of that generation, I have to say, get used to it. Why? Because this is where greatness comes from. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this, and don't forget, there are links in the description and on the pinned comment for my 3 graphic novels. Part of the new indie scene with true heroes and entertainment of quality that is not based upon the mainstream political narrative. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on those links in the description and go on over and order yourself a copy of one of my graphic novels today. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.